That wraps up new business. Old business, that 1B was also slipped in, unbeknownst to me. I apologize for that, but the good news is that's going to slip out just as quick as it slipped in. That shouldn't be on there, so we're done with that. Good job. That was quick. Nice job.
Check.
And
That long.
Wait, don't we have a rule we have to argue about something for at least
Yeah.
a certain amount of time?
we argued how we got there.
I just assume you handle it.
No, nothing on your profile.
I'll throw John Toohey under the bus for that. His name is on there, so it's his fault.
It's actually Granicus' fault.
No, that's our system.
Yes. Granicus, I believe,
I like the old
automatically
system where
puts it
we made our
on as
own.
long as it wasn't closed. So remember our.
Well, why wasn't it on earlier? When did it just come on at the last minute?
Well, if you recall, you repealed the local law to make it an ordinance at, the meeting, I
Right,
believe.
right.
You know, and then at that time, John had also wanted you to amend the statute.
No, I know that, no, I'm
to-
just saying, why would the system throw it on again, you know?
Don't ask me
today?
about Granicus.
Well, that's.
Yes, all I know is it doesn't.
That's the part I don't get.
Do you want to explain
No,
that?
I have no
Yes.
explanation.
Yeah, that's a whole new league.
Evil thing.
Okay, and then the other piece of old business is the merging of the HLPC, HAC, which, those of us who were fortunate enough to be here Monday, I thought that was a very informative, presentation, I guess, for lack of a better word, that, you know, we have people from different areas of expertise that Kingston citizens and the mayor jointly held so people could, so we could be open about what's going on and what people's concerns are, and there was a lot of information. That is also online now, that meeting, so you can see it. If you haven't, it's probably worth watching. There was a lot of interesting information that was presented. There were two representatives from the state that were sharing their expertise as far as municipalities of similar sizes, what they're doing, you know, with their historic preservation, and, you know, which ones had, you know, most of them had just one committee, but there was quite a bit of information. I felt it was confusing before that, and now with all the additional information, I feel like I took like a step backwards as far as being any closer to making sense of this, but I think that's because, you know, in 2 days, it's not enough time to really process a lot of the information that was given out, and I'm sure there's more to come. But on a positive note, I think that there's looks to be a good working relationship, and I think everyone wants the same thing. We want what's best for Kingston and what's best for the history of Kingston, preserving the history. And I also believe that it's not about any one thing or anything that's happening today. My thinking with this and with a lot of the stuff that we do, I feel that it's something that, you know, 20 years down the road, when people look back and you know, they can say, you know, they did a good thing, or that made sense what they did. And that's how we, you know, especially, you know, in a historic topic, that's something I think that's very important for us to be mindful of. What makes the most sense, not just for today, but for the consistency of where we're going with all this stuff. And that, you know, it's not, it's easier said than done, but that's my editorial. Someone who was there, does anyone want to add anything as far as what, you know, what direction you think would be a good one to take? And
Well, I have some information to pass out. Kind of, I mean, what's on the table is merging HLPC and HAC. So this is a little kind of chart of comparing the two.
By the way, before you begin, Andrea, I want to thank you for taking this on. When Rennie put it out there, if anyone wanted to be the point person for a lot of this information, Andrea volunteered, probably before she knew what she was getting into. But I thank you for that, and I think it's been helpful, and I think it'll continue to be helpful as far as us getting information, and not just us, but the public and these committees as well. So thank you.
I'll be happy to help. So this compares the two, so you have everything right there. But there's also some maps if you're not familiar with the so that when they talk about it in the charts or in the draft here, you know where they're talking about.
Pass it around.
So I mean, that's the major issue, is whether or not we are in agreement with merging, which in my opinion, with the research I've done and people I've talked to, it seems like nobody's disagreeing with that. And just watching the process of doing it, you know, because there were some questions, I don't know, I didn't get a packet, so I'm not on the committee. And I have that.
This we got.
Was this sent out?
Here, take
Yes.
this,
This was sent out too?
Yes.
that's the whole, shoot, the whole thing.
Oh, thank
That's
you.
what I've scribbled notes on, that's everything from tonight.
So yeah, the things that is passed out are the only additionals, everything else is here. So there's just some questions that, you know, if we decide to move forward with the merger, that we want to seriously consider, which you could find someplace, I will eventually find it. Sorry.
While you're looking, Andrea, the state had a model resolution, or a model example of what, you know, what it could or should look like, you know, in their estimation. But I got the impression from the mayor that that's sort of what we used as our baseline, and that's sort of what we used as a guide in what you originally presented.
There are model codes in all sorts of areas of law. Model codes are just that. They're models that are supposed to be adjusted and amended for the individual locality. They can be used as a guide, they can be used as a tool, they can be used in part, they can be used in whole. Specific provisions can be called out and incorporated into the legislation. Our legislation was originally based on a model code that was amended to include provisions that are specific for Kingston. The model code is regularly amended as well, so that certainly can be used as a tool with regard to the provisions that are potentially being changed. For the most part, this legislation is a combination of 3 or 4 current subsections in our code, and the changes from the language that's currently in the code are significant, although small, in terms of the actual number of sections. The vast majority of the text is simply a repeat of what is currently in our code.
I would just like to say in the meeting on Monday night, I had the same feeling that Andrea had, that most everybody saw the wisdom of combining the 2 committees. I was at a different presentation, and they were talking about historic commissions in other cities. The city of Philadelphia, a little bit bigger than us, they only have 1 historic commission, and they only have 6 members on that commission. So this is the sort of thing that also they were saying at that event, that it's best to have people with some expertise in historic preservation. It's best to have people on the commission who know aspects of this, whether through academia, through experience, through working as a contractor, what have you. And short of that, if you don't have people with that expertise, then people who are definitely dedicated to this, people who have done a lot of work, perhaps in their own houses, who are dedicated to the study of history in the local area, and that sort of thing. When we have 2 committees, we can't have that kind of focus. So another thing that they were pointing out is that it's quite unusual for there to be 2 different historic committees. So I think the idea of putting them into one makes a lot of sense. Another thing that I got out of the meeting,
That is
out of it,
there are, actually I couldn't find any state municipalities that actually have 2. So this is very rare that we do have two. So, I mean, New York City has one too, just a few more numbers. But
70, I think.
yeah, I mean, having one is kind of the norm.
Mhm.
So,
And if you could
not
just-
just Philadelphia.
If we could also indulge for a minute and just back up, you have Sue Cahill from the planning department, you have Tommy Tiano from the building department, who actually manage the two different committees, and they can speak to the impracticality of the system the way it is now. Sue can also speak to how the zoning subcommittee of the comprehensive plan committee, that's accurate?
That's correct.
Came to the conclusion that the two committees had to, should be merged, and what representation there was from the two committees on your subcommittee.
Right. Well, in the comprehensive plan itself, it was a goal to consider merging the two commissions under one umbrella, because they saw the duplicity that was occurring and the frustration that it was creating for different applicants. And Tom and I see it on a daily basis when an individual comes into our office and they want to do a sign in one of these districts. They may have to go to the planning board, they may have to go to heritage, they may have to go to landmarks, they may have to go to zoning, depending on what their, what the parameters are. So we felt that the two commissions, heritage and landmarks, have a lot of the same goals in mind, and that's really to incorporate and encourage not only the preservation, but also to, make sure that the design elements are there that, what's the word I'm looking for, that are qualitative and that conducive to the historic character of the areas. So that in mind, it's difficult for us when we have applicants coming through our offices, handing them, oh, you have to do this one, you have to do that one, you have to do this, you have to do that. And we felt that, and I support the merging. I truly do. I think it makes it more streamlined. I think that there are other changes that are going to be coming forward after this that will help as well to streamline some of the planning and zoning aspects of our laws. So we want to be business friendly. We want to encourage people to come into our community. I'm not saying just give them a blank check. But what we're doing is just trying to make it encouraging and attractive for businesses.
Randy, I think you didn't finish your thought before I kind of circumvented you, so if you want to continue.
No, that's fine.
I
It was on the topic. It was on the topic.
Okay.
One thing that became clear to me too is that we want to be sure that there's predictability in the process. And I think that's been lacking to a great extent. So we want to have a historic commission that people are comfortable actually coming to. If they feel like it's going to be an onerous process, the concern is that they will then skip that, and we won't have any control at all. People will do what they want to do. So we have to make it something that homeowners can actually take part in and won't feel like it's going to gum up the works a huge amount.
Your point is well taken, because it's not only commercial businesses that we are talking about. We're talking about homeowners and residential property owners that have to go through these different processes depending on what project they're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an excellent point, and I think we have to keep that in the back of our minds as well.
So another point that came out, for me at least as we were there, is that part of me kept hearing this and thinking, this is something that's about rich people. And so we have to be very careful because we want to protect our historic heritage. But we also want to make sure that it's not something that begins to price people out of living in Kingston. And so, you know, that's something for us to keep in mind. Predictability, though, is also about making sure that we've got clear standards. And there is that the Department of the Interior, I think, has standards for historic areas. And so as much as possible, we want to make sure that our standards match theirs, which means that if somebody's moving into town, because a lot of people are moving into town precisely because they like the older buildings, if they understand what the standards are before they move in, we don't have a lot of problems further down the line. I think another thing that came out for me too was working with people early in the process, when they think about renovating a property, working with them early so they know what the parameters are, so they don't go through several months of process and then all of a sudden somebody says, oh wait, well this is what the parameters are, not the ones you've been working with. Because that's the sort of thing that really frustrates people. And,
Right.
you know, yes about business, but I'm really thinking about there's a lot of people, homeowners, who we need to be involving in the process.
Well, I think the point about, you know, just rich people getting the historic homes, I thought the state did a great job addressing that, because they kind of countered that with there are a lot of properties that, if they're designated historic or in the district, that they get good tax credits for. So I think there's actually, you know, on the other side of that, there's a lot of help for people that might be more interested in that might have, you know, have a passion for the history of that. And that was, because I thought that too, but it was a lot less scary when I heard them speak, and they gave a lot of examples in a lot of different places where
And that's,
that wasn't as big a
I think
concern.
it'd be worth listening to, because I think it was Erin who then addressed that after Mayor Noble made that statement. Erin, one of the representatives of the state, was saying that she didn't believe that it was a form of, or helping gentrification, thanks partly because of the tax credit,
but if people don't know about the tax credits, that's what I'm saying, communication is a really, really important thing here, so that not only do we communicate early in the process what the expectations are, we also make it clear that there's possibilities of helping people so that they're then brought into the process rather than alienated because they hear, oh, I'm going to have to use some special material and I can't possibly afford that, so I'm just not going to tell the planning department what I'm doing. I'm just going to do it on Saturday night.
And,
Right, so I thought it was
and
very
the city has produced through past certified local government grants, publications. And what we typically do, I try and work very closely with building safety. So if an applicant is interested in a property or developing a property, we'll schedule a sit down with them together so that we're both on the same playing field. And then we talk about all of the different requirements, and we have brochures that we hand out routinely, and I'm sure you do in your office too, Tommy. But that's, you know, so we're trying to not only educate, but to coordinate our reviews.
but that wouldn't, what you're suggesting wouldn't really take place in the actual language that we're going to develop.
Right, we're just talking about what we learned on Monday night.
I think what Remy and Sue and Andrea are saying makes a lot of sense, and I support it. And Philadelphia does it that way, New York does it, probably a lot of other places do it. But I'm just curious to ask. It makes so much sense, and hindsight is 20/20. I'm just how did we get into this situation where we have two organizations? I don't know.
Bernie can explain. That's from the dawn of time.
Yeah, I'm
The
a,
10th alderman.
That's the temple of knowledge. Yes.
first of all, we have to remember that histories change.
Yeah.
There's not an original building in Kingston. That includes the Senate House, the courthouse, your house, and my house. And when you give guidance to these folks who are coming and looking for, can I put a porch on, do it this one, that, it's reasonable in manner and moderate in degree. We have a lot of properties which are now vacant, so forth.
Can I just,
Yes,
Doug's question was how we got to the point where we had two commissions with parallel responsibilities, and it dates back to the Urban Cultural Park Commission and the creation And that's history that predates all of us except yourself.
Well,
So
I
if you could explain that.
Okay, I purchased a building from Urban Renewal uptown. Repurposed it, but I was interfered by an architect who built this box next to the courthouse. And underneath that box is a beautiful building which would equate to what's down in Jefferson, Virginia, okay? So there were two standards going on. And the heritage was kind of a relief of that type of strictness, okay?
The
Because-
commissions were formed in response to certain grant opportunities that were available at different times.
Yes.
You know, so they formed independently,
Yeah.
having jurisdiction over different geographic areas. And over time, they continued to overlap more and more. You know, it really was just a matter of timing.
Yeah.
You know, and legislation was adopted over time, you know, that, created these ambiguities.
That's not
Did you check, like, cities like Charleston and Augusta, and like, more like
I did
stricter
check through a whole bunch,
communities?
I don't remember off the top of
You
my
get any more
head.
historical in Philadelphia, that's got history.
Yeah, but I think those other places, I mean, I
York is
know,
old too.
I think Hilton Head was the only place where the red roof didn't really have a red roof or something.
The only other one that I recall, like, you know, Everhead, which isn't the same, but I just remember it's where we were in school, but, I could find the list, because I found like 6 or 7 different municipalities, just
Yeah.
out of a quick search, so.
Any other comments, or Jeffrey?
Well, I think, and I mentioned this last time, I think, well, as we continue this conversation, I think we are lucky that we have so many expertise in our community. We have historians that are already part of these commissions, architects, preservationists, and I think it would be important to bring them into this conversation. They know, and obviously Sue and others, they know what they do. I read this and I try to understand it, but I don't know what is left out or what was never there that should be included. So I think it would be important for
I mean,
us to
the
include
commissions
that.
have met already and talked about it and discussed it, so they're aware of it, and
And
I
I
thought
do,
it was
I do
okay.
have a
They
list
have,
of
but-
things that they are concerned about that have been excluded. So I did get that to you, because I thought I sent that to Farley to get to you, but it's not.
And they were
So here.
also, the version, the draft that I emailed this morning and just passed out addresses those concerns.
Oh, yeah, I haven't seen that,
Okay,
so.
so we will get to that. There are certain minor changes in the draft that was sent out yesterday that addresses pretty much all the concerns that were raised. And Sue again can speak to this. There is some confusion with regard to the extent and how the HLPC and the HAC participated in the development of the initial recommendations. On the initial zoning revision commission, the then chair of the HLPC was a member of that commission, and the chair of HAC was a member of that commission. At that time, that was George Donskoy. George was on the commission, and how much he did or didn't participate, Sue can speak to that, but he was on the commission just as the HAC chair was on the commission. After the recommendations were made, there were additional meetings with the chairs of the two commissions to address, the issues and the concerns that they had, and they were fully involved in this process. The actual draft of this piece of legislation was done by my office after the Zoning Revision Commission completed their work based upon an approach that we were going to address procedural changes in the commissions first. And as I explained last time, the first step in that process was amending the code with regard to the Zoning Board of Appeals, because the Zoning Board of Appeals was determined to be a bigger priority because it was specifically out of compliance with state law. We did that, I believe, in October or November of last year with the old council. And the intention and the stated path forward at that point was to bring this legislation forward next. Okay, given the change in the council and the fact that we now have 4 new members, this legislation and other time constraints based upon other issues that were going on, this legislation was presented to this body as soon as this body was ready to address it. Again, this is a combination of the current pieces of the code that address the powers of the HLPC, the powers of the HAC. There are a number of reasons why, timeline-wise, it's important for this to proceed now and for the referrals to be made out to the various entities that legally have to have an opportunity to comment. Sue prepared a list of what those entities would be. We have to schedule a public hearing. The process needs to move forward, particularly because you have a new budget year starting, and part of the legislation that was never followed requires the different commissions to submit a budget that reflects what their goals are and what they want to do in the coming year. Your budget process is starting, August, September. Okay, so if these commissions are going to be merged, and they're going to be merged under the planning department, this process has to be done within a certain, with that in mind. It's now May. When we have to send referrals out to county planning, city planning, SHPO, State Historic Preservation. We also have to send notices out to the adjoining towns, which Sue and I figured out this afternoon would be Ulster, Esopus, Red Hook, and Rhinebeck. Because, believe it or not, despite the fact that the river is separating us, they are still adjoining towns. They would have 30 days to respond. Presumably the public hearing would be scheduled for the same night as your next meeting. Okay, and then assuming that the legislation is ready to move out of committee, it would need 2 readings, which would mean the first reading would be in July, the second reading would be in August, which is basically when the budget process would start. Part of the proposal and one of the issues that has come up repeatedly is that there are currently provisions in the law for the commission to recommend landmarking either districts or individual buildings. That is a process that costs money, and they have no money, okay? So if that's something that they're interested in pursuing, there has to be a budget, there has to be a separate line, it has to be clarified what department they come out of and where that budget line is. There are other issues related to timing that my office is not comfortable talking about in a public session, but there is a process that has to be followed moving forward. In terms of the questions that were raised by the members of the HLPC, and actually Rennie had raised these as well when we met, when was it, like 4 to 6 weeks ago. We have adjusted the timeline that was set forth in the original legislation. If I could just walk you through the changes in the initial draft, because that'll address most things. I think the most significant change, which I have to give, I'm kidding, deference to Sue. On the second page, it says, the mayor shall select the membership of the board, giving preference where practical and appropriate, and it said in his discretion. And Sue wanted to make it very clear that the mayor could also be a she.
The second page,
Yes.
38.
So we changed that to his/her, okay?
Thank you, Sue.
You're the
Yes.
next one.
No, no.
Reappointment, no.
We added, let's see, with regard to the concerns from the HLPC that were raised both at this meeting and on Monday night with regard to their ability to grant emergency relief. We went to the language of the new model code and incorporated the moratorium language from the new model code that reads, once the commission has issued a notice of a proposed designation, it may recommend to the municipal governing board, which is you.
What is that?
That is on, and I'm sorry, there are no section numbers at this point.
Page 4.
Oh, 1, 2.
You're looking at an old one.
Page 4.
No, it's actually 2, 4, it's actually on,
You don't have it stapled then?
yes,
Demolition by neglect.
it's on the 8th page, 8 into 9. It should vary, no, just on the line. 8 into 9, okay? And that is the language that comes directly out of the new model code. If you notice that the model code recognizes the fact that the administrative board or administrative commission doesn't have the authority to issue an emergency order of any sort, that they can make a recommendation, and then if the governing body decides to go along with that recommendation, you can direct our office to seek some sort of emergency relief. Again, that comes right out of the model code that was advocated, as the template by the HLPC. So we added that to address that concern.
But is that a problem because of, to pass through us, that takes time.
Correct,
And right now, the way it's written, not the model code,
Right.
but our actual code is written, they could decide right then and there without going through us, correct?
and they can issue what is legally an unenforceable order. Yeah, the fact that it's in the code doesn't mean that they can do it, and doesn't mean that any court would enforce it, okay? And it would lead to protracted, ugly litigation, because basically you would have a commission without any legal process restricting a private property owner's use of their land. Okay,
But
which is-
that only happened once, right, in 30 years?
Well, the truth is, yeah, it didn't even happen that once, okay? But, a lot of this is, a meaningless discussion, because the last time the commission, the commission has not pursued designation for either a district or a property in recent memory. They haven't done it, and at this point, they wouldn't have the resources to do it because they don't have a budget. So we're basically talking about a hypothetical situation, that has not occurred. In any event, the language that, we included was language out of the model code that allows the commission to make a recommendation. With regard to the timeline, that initially we had 45 days from the submission of the application. Given the need for a public hearing and the anomalies that with scheduling, what we changed that to was that the public hearing, okay, which is basically the first reading when it's on the agenda for the first time, would be held within 30 days of submission of the application. So basically, the application is submitted, and then it's on the next month's agenda. And then within 45 days from it being on the agenda, 45 days from the public hearing, they need to render a decision, which basically means they have 2 meetings to address the application. The additional 15 days was just to account for the fact that there are times when the meeting is a little later in the month. So at this point, we considered 62 days, which would be what the planning board has. We decided that 75 was more viable because it was 30 to put it on the agenda, and then 45 in the event that, you know, a decision had to be kicked out to the next month. I think those were, Sue, were there any other changes that you had?
Yeah, I haven't looked at your new version yet, so.
I mean, there were, you know,
Yeah.
punctuation, punctuation that was changed. There were some blanks
Editorial.
in the current document,
My edits.
based on the sections not being numbered yet. And once, you know, there is direction, and before it's actually, before the document is actually sent out to planning in the towns, my secretary will number the sections, so that when they make their comments, they can make their comments based upon, you know, specific
Yeah,
section numbers.
Education.
Yeah. Just in addition to what you said, Dan, I think you'll get a better understanding if you make an effort to attend their meetings, okay? Because that's where the behavior and the problems exist with the applicant and the board. You'll see what goes on. And maybe coming away from that, you'll get a better understanding of why it really should be one commission to get the job done.
Well, and this is not really about particular issues with either commission. This is about consolidating the review process. And I would just ask if Sue, if you could explain the benefit of coordinating the, you know, the combined review under the planning department so that things are run with the planning board. I'm not asking, you know.
I think it should go into the building department.
Keep thinking.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a benefit in combining the two commissions because both bodies are essentially reviewing and asking the same exact questions of individual applicants. And I believe that it is more business friendly for us as the city of Kingston. I also believe it allows us to work more smoothly in getting projects through the review process. I do think, though, and I'm continuing to give this review and thought, one of the things that I would like to see added in here, and I'm not sure, I haven't talked to Dan about it yet, but I think that just as the planning board and the zoning board members are required to have an attendance level as also an educational requirement. They're required to get so many hours of education per year. For planning and zoning, it's state law, 4 hours a year. But I think that that should be carried through to these commissions. I think it's a very valuable way to bring members up to speed on various topics that are relevant to what they're undertaking and reviewing. So that would be another thing I would be
And my
looking at.
assumption would be that in response to the referral to city planning,
That
your
will
board
be
would
another,
send
right,
back a
exactly.
recommendation to that
Right.
effect.
And I have given this Dan's prior version. I did give it a cursory review. We went through all of my comments after he complained about all my little sticky notes. But we did go through it point by point, and I think it's really coming along. So I think the document as it stands right now is ready to be referred out to these other commissions. I think it should be put online as well for the general public, which through the city
Well,
clerk.
I think that's a great point, because I think, so my next question is, how do we now get our input and everyone, do the same thing that you did? Because I think now it's important that
Right.
a lot of people with a lot more expertise than some of us start
Yeah.
chime in and get their voices heard, and I think that's the next step as far as but how do we?
Well, just like I said, you schedule a public hearing for the next Laws and Rules meeting. You refer it out to we said four towns, 4 towns plan, so there's 7 referrals.
County
It's done-
planning, city
it's done in
planning,
one
yeah.
referral.
We
Oh,
made the
okay.
list today.
It's done in one referral with an attachment that says the following entities are being provided with this document. And, you write it to, next month's agenda. I did ask everybody to review between last month and this month, and if they had any questions with regard to the content that we can address now, it's, the more that, those questions can be addressed now, the better off we are for next month. And if there is some additional tinkering before the, referral actually goes out, that certainly can be, taken care of, in the next couple of days. Tommy, did you want to speak to any of this?
Wait, can I ask a question first?
Go ahead.
So if we schedule the public hearing for June, does that mean that the ball is officially rolling, and then the next month we will be voting on it?
Well, the ball's already rolling. The ball's already rolling.
Yeah, but I mean, we don't have to schedule the public hearing for June, we can schedule it for July.
If you schedule the public hearing for July, then the legislation cannot be adopted until September, and you miss the budget cycle.
And what would be the downfall of that?
Take the money from the balance.
Yeah, there are other reasons, again, to move this thing forward that I'm not going to discuss in public session.
Jim, we need to, we need to vote tonight to do a resolution to call for a public meeting next month?
Well,
Do we
yeah,
need to
the
do a
public hearing, you should
Public hearing.
put the
And the
rest
referrals.
And the referrals.
Yeah.
It's the referrals
To
of the
the
public
county,
hearing.
to the city.
And the answer to your question is, the opportunity for members outside of the commission and outside of the entities to offer their opinion is at the public hearing. And generally what we do is, we schedule the public hearing and we leave, an opportunity for written comments to be submitted after the public hearing, all of which can be, considered.
Right.
So that it would be time to have all that considered.
So then after the public hearing, you leave like a 10-day window to sign other additional information in writing?
Yeah.
Something along those lines?
And I can work with either Dee or Carly to get it on the website, the city's website.
I believe it's already on. Did you put it on?
Is this current one on
His latest version went on
today?
the agenda, well, it's
An
in
attachment
the
to
agenda
today's
packet,
agenda.
so if they look at this packet.
Oh,
they
okay,
can
but
see
it's not,
It's probably not separate.
it's not identifiable.
Right,
That's the
it's
thing
just
that we
part of
need
the
to do.
agenda.
Yeah,
So we can take that out and.
yeah, we're gonna have to. So if the normal layperson went on the city's website, they're not gonna think about going to the Laws and Rules Committee agenda and then looking at the agenda packet. That's my point. I think it needs to be maybe more
Right.
prominently listed.
So getting back to, so do we need a resolution for that then?
Yeah.
I do.
You don't need a resolution to post it on the website, but you do need a resolution to schedule the public hearing
Public hearing.
and to
do have
do the
to include all
referrals.
the other, and to do the referrals,
Right.
are they two separate ones? Or can I just put them all in one?
One.
I think I need another way.
And eventually it's going to be recorded. So we have to do with the, did we change it?
Will
The old one?
these requirements that were
I think we did, didn't
licensing
we?
architect on it, and
Question.
the building, and that all the other residents that
We have to find out.
all
when
the
that is.
residents
In order
at the time of appointment, is that gonna carry through to this commission?
There
Yeah,
are
that's, yeah,
requirements.
it's,
They have a bunch of.
yeah, it's, do you have the draft?
There's, look at the second page of
Oh, it's all.
the new draft.
And everything other than city residences is required. Yeah.
Oh, there's,
Yeah. Everything other, Pat, everything other than city residences is a requirement.
Oh, thank you.
State historic preservation.
okay, so there it is. There it is.
Yep.
June, it's going to be the 20th.
Actually, the
20?
addition is the alternate commission member.
I'm sorry.
In addition, there's a few additions here that, in terms of the membership, not on the current code, but it's helpful, I think.
So yeah, you definitely.
The alternate commission members.
Make a comment or ask.
Oh, so that's an addition? No, that's
Yeah.
something new.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bill?
One or the other.
You know it.
I have plenty of comments. I could also just go downstairs and have a
What
look.
I would say, this would include
Resolution
notifying.
scheduling public hearing on June 20th, and
Indicate this
referring
would
the
include.
proposed, and referring the proposed legislation to
Now, this commission will be presenting possibly.
Ulster County Planning Board, Ulster County Planning Board, City of Kingston, referring the proposed amendments to the zoning code, or the proposed amendments to the city code, the white zoning code, because there are other sections that are wrapped in.
Put the proposed amendments.
To county, Ulster County Planning, City of Kingston Planning, New York State Historic Preservation,
Well, you talk faster than I
you can just say Sheffield. The town of Ulster, the town of Esopus.
Please.
Where's that list you made, Sue?
I don't know, I gave it to you.
Hold on, I have the list here.
About necessary agents or something.
How about yeah,
No, I got it.
I can determine.
Right there. What's that? You can determine?
Well, I can work with the clerk's office.
So with the vote, passing there, could we manage?
You have to get like.
I know to raise money for the city.
Historic pirates or something.
Piracy, piracy, right?
I said it works, yeah.
What's that?
I said it works, yeah.
Then we have privateers.
That's embarrassing.
I just want to see my email, my legacy.
Remember what I said in response to that, right?
In front of them.
The glasses on, would you?
I gotta take them off.
Yeah,
What is that? I have to get those. Funny.
Oh, you fall downstairs.
Like I had.
The audio overlay?
Just leave a copy, I'll stop and get it.
Okay, I finally
Be
got
here
it.
tomorrow.
Bill, just before you begin, this gentleman over here had a question for you.
Monday, fine.
If it's a question, if it's a commentary, I'm gonna take it. If it's a question, I'll take it, but.
If you take a question,
be
you
appropriate.
have to
Gotta
ask.
take-
Well, no, we're not taking it from anyone, because that's a non-public hearing, so I'm gonna be consistent.
You take the question from him.
Right, I'm being consistent, and I'm not,
No exceptions.
okay, so a resolution to schedule a public hearing on June 20th, 2018, to address the possible merger of historic landmarks and heritage area commissions. This would include referring the proposed amendments to Ulster County Planning, Kingston Planning, Town of Ulster, New York State, SHPO, Town of Esopus, Rhinebeck, and Red Hook.
So you have a motion, and then before we actually go, there was one thing I wanted to clarify. There is a.
Let me get a motion in a second, then we'll go on to question. Can I get a motion on that?
Motion.
Second.
There is currently a section in the draft, in the definition part of the draft, that states demolition by neglect.
Yes.
And that was inadvertently left blank. The definition of demolition by neglect comes from the demolition by neglect section, which I have written out here, which is permitting property to fall into a serious state of disrepair, so as to result in the deterioration of any exterior architectural feature, which would, in the judgment of the l.r.hlpc, produce a detrimental effect on the character of the property itself. And that is the first subsection of the demolition of neglect section, but it didn't carry over into the definition section. So in the final draft version that will be sent out with the referral, that language will be inserted. At that point, in addition, the final draft that will be sent will include section numbers and subsection numbers, so that when comments are made, they can refer to a specific subsection.
Can that also be added to what's on the,
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna say,
well,
is that gonna be
yeah.
added tomorrow, so I can put that on?
Yeah, when will that be?
When the final,
well, I mean, what's online right now, so the
Right.
public can see, can we add that?
Right, so,
Yeah.
sooner?
yeah,
so everyone will have it with the definition as of tomorrow?
Well, as long as we get.
It's up to
forward,
Dan.
so.
Okay. All right, any further question before we vote on this resolution? I will take the vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Around we go.
Huh?
So I think it's important that we continue to get input. I think it's important we continue to get input even prior to the public hearing rather than waiting for that.
Huh?
So
First time hearing
I think it's important that we continue to get input from our constituents and the
So when I
people
come
in
from my
those so that,
budget,
we have as much information as possible leading up to the public
and generally,
hearing.
anything that is received prior to the public hearing is just made part of the record of the public hearing. So if, comments are made in writing, they will just be, yeah.
And since I've done a lot, if anybody wants to meet up and
What?
we can go over anything, just let me know.
more public comment before you have it, so it's open, we have that chance.
All right, I think we have a lot of homework.
I'm off tomorrow,
I think this is a
Friday.
positive thing though.
Monday morning, first
I
thing.
think we're doing a good thing. I think the more feedback we can get, the better this is gonna.
I'll catch you, don't worry.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
The commission.
Second? Second?
I just keep showing up.
Nobody wants to leave. All in favor?
Ooh, I'm sorry.